Good day. My name is Darren Gifer from Bachelor of Science and Secondary Education, and I'm going to discuss the Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance. Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance. The patterns of inheritance in sexual reproduction are described by means of Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance. A set of characters or traits passes from parents to offspring during reproduction. These characters pass through generations by the inheritance of genetic material through sex cells. Each character is determined by a particular gene in the genome. The alternative form of a gene are referred to as alleles. The main difference between Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance is that Mendelian inheritance describes as the determination of traits by means of dominant and recessive alleles of a particular gene, whereas non-Mendelian inheritance describes the inheritance of traits which does not follow Mendelian laws. Moving on to Mendelian inheritance. Mendelian inheritance describes the way in which genes and their corresponding traits are passed from parents to their offspring by means of dominant and recessive alleles. The modes of Mendelian inheritance are autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked dominant, and X-linked recessive. The fundamental laws of inheritance were first described by Gregor Mendel in 1865. According to Mendel, genes can be found in pairs and they are inherited in distinct units. Thus, offspring receives one gene from each parent. The alternative forms of gene are called alleles. Depending on the appearance of genes in the offspring, two types of alleles can be identified as dominant alleles and recessive alleles. There are three fundamental laws of inheritance. First is the law of segregation, second is the law of independent assortment, and the last law, or the third law, is law of dominance. The law of segregation. Any inheritable trait comes in an allele pair. During the production of sex cells, each allele of the pair segregates into one sex cell. Once they are united during fertilization, the offspring has inherited an allele from each parent. So, during this fertilization, the offspring receives each allele from their parents. The law of independent assortment. The different alleles of genes are sorted independently from each other in such a way that the inheritance of one allele is independent of the inheritance of another allele. So, in the law of independent assortment, the different alleles of genes inherit sorted independently, so their inheritance is one allele is independent of the inheritance of another allele. In short, they are independent to each other. While in the law of dominance, in the presence of two alleles, only the dominant form of the allele is expressed. Let's move on to non-Mendelian inheritance. The trait in non-Mendelian inheritance. The traits which do not follow the Mendelian inheritance follows the non-Mendelian inheritance. Typically, the genes with multiple alleles are inherited in non-Mendelian patterns. Multiple alleles do not show through dominance or repressiveness. The phenotype of the offspring highly depends on the environment. In humans, almost all the traits are determined by non-Mendelian inheritance. Examples of the non-Mendelian inheritance include multiple alleles, incomplete dominance, codominance, polygenic inheritance, phenotypic phenotypic plasticity, and sex-linked traits. There are examples of non-Mendelian inheritance. There are six examples. First is the multiple alleles. For the determination of a particular trait, multiple alleles comprise more than two alleles in the population. Human blood type is determined by three alleles, A, B, and O. So, if in the Mendelian inheritance, there are only two alleles, right? Each with their parent. While in the Mendelian inheritance, there are multiple alleles. So multiple alleles. They in these alleles, the human blood type is determined by three alleles, A, B, and O. So next is the incomplete dominance. In incomplete dominance, a heterozygous individual contains a phenotype halfway between the dominant and recessive phenotypes. Different flower colors in snapdragons arise by the incomplete dominance. While in codominance, both dominant and recessive alleles independently show in the offspring. As a result of codominance, roan cattle show both red and white hair on their skin. So in codominance, both dominant and recessive allele show up in the offspring. So the result of this codominance, they're in roan cattle, the both red and white hair is shown on their skin. Polygenic inheritance. In polygenic traits, more than one gene is involved in the determination of a particular trait. These genes can be found in different loci of different chromosomes. Weight, height, skin color, and most of the other human traits are polygenic. So in polygenic, there are more than one gene involved. And these genes can be found in different chromosomes. Well, in phenotypic plasticity, the phenotype affects the environment. Skin color, personality traits, weight, and height are phenotypic traits. So in phenotypic plasticity, it affects the environment, either the skin color, personality traits, weight, height. They're all examples of phenotypic traits. While in sex-linked inheritance, the inheritance of genes of the X chromosome is different in males and females. In order to show the recessive phenotype in males, only a single recessive allele is required. Therefore, males get the recessive condition in diseases such as hemophilia and red or green color blindness. So the inheritance of the genes in the X chromosome is different in males and females according to the sex-linked inheritance. So in order to show the recessive phenotype in males, we only need one single recessive allele. Therefore, there, males can get recessive conditions or disease like hemophilia or color blindness. Let's move on to the similarities between Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance. Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance describes the pattern of inheritance of a particular trait during sexual production. So they are both describing the patterns of inheritance um, in different or particular trait during sexual reproduction. Both Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance can be used to describe the genetic basis of the phenotypes in the heterozygous individuals for a particular trait. They are both describing the genetic basis of the phenotypes of every individual. So let's move on to the difference between Mendelian and non-Mendelian inheritance. In Mendelian inheritance, the way in which genes and their corresponding traits are passed from parents to their offspring by means of dominant and recessive alleles. While in non-Mendelian inheritance, the patterns of inheritance which do not follow the Mendelian inheritance. So in Mendelian inheritance, the corresponding traits are passed from parents to their offspring by means of dominant and recessive alleles, while the non-Mendelian do not follow the Mendelian inheritance. And that's all for today's video. Hope you learned something. Thank you.